already
Okay,
recording.
Yes. Something I noticed in your analysis that you didn't talk about, and so I just want you to think about this, and I don't have an answer. But I noticed, though, you know, the 9 cases, by the way, if you all have not read this, his writing on these 9 students we had interviews with, it's a good read. I mean, you wrote those cases well, and they tell a very compelling story. One thing that I noticed among them that I want you to think about is this. You talked about protective factors of hope and how so many of them identify these adults who are outside of the school setting. And these, in a lot of the cases, I think most of them, these are the same adults that are contributing to a toxic environment, right? An abusive situation or undue stress of some sort. And the flip side of it is these students on the lower side of the hope that you interviewed, they all identify their teachers as being barriers to hope, and certainly the narrative data that you drew from those interviews support that. But my my teacher side of me wants to believe that there's some good people teaching, right? And this is the student's perspective on these teachers, which is valid, of course, but there's another side that we might not. So I want you to think about this paradox that these parents or influential adults, guardians outside of the school, in some ways are contributing to this toxic environment, and yet you identify them as protective factors. And on the flip side, these teachers are universally shown as being barriers.
And I agree with you. I believe that there definitely are teachers who are who exhibit some of the same behaviors as those adults who were considered caring adults, if you will. But I think that for me, in this particular study, I didn't lead the student in any direction, and so as a result of the kids that I interviewed, the data just the results were just that they identified teachers as individuals who were diminishing their hope. But that doesn't mean that there's not a teacher in their life who is not encouraging hope. It's just that that's the individual that they chose to identify when the questions were asked. But I agree with you.
Well, what about the other side of it, though, where the parent or guardian are seen through both lenses, right, as causing me a lot of stress as a student, but at the same time is my source of support?
So one of the students in the study, Jennifer, she sort of talked about that dynamic and how she actually had average hope. And one of the glaring differences between her and the student that had high hope was the fact that she said that when I'm doing really well, my parents, they dote on me, they love me. But when I'm doing really bad, then it's kind of like they don't want to have anything to do with me. So it's like a double-edged sword. As opposed to the student who had the high hope, she said, regardless of whether I'm doing good or bad, yes, my father, I know that he's disappointed in me, but the message that he sends to me is that he still loves me, he still cares about me. And so, obviously, he's doing it in a way where the student is able to separate the fact that he still loves me, but I know that I messed up. As opposed to with this other young student who, for whatever reason, she's not able to separate the fact that this person still loves me and cares about me, but they're just upset with me right now. And I think naturally, just as human beings, we grow frustrated with young people, and then we love them all at the same time. So what my mom taught me, we can love you and be disappointed in you at the same time. And so we as adults have to learn how to teach, we have to communicate in a way where students understand the dynamic of that relationship, so that way we're not doing more diminishing of hope than increasing it.
I would take Sheldon's comments and put that in the limitations at the end of the study. Like, what can be studied further is the relationship that, teachers, positive teachers might have on, like just adding that later.
Okay.
I don't think you need to add a whole nother, or go back into the data, but I do think that it's important to think about that.
Yeah, I think you identified that the teacher's voice is not in here, and that was your purpose. The and I'm good with that. But I think I would like to see in the analysis part, what you just said about this paradox about how the parents are seeing that both they exist, together.
Right.
Because it shows up in your data pretty clearly.
But if you're gonna do that, like, make sure that it doesn't read like I'm blaming the parent.
Right.
You want to, there's certain factors that impact the whole family.
Right.
And so it could be a fine line between, like setting it up where it's like, oh, well, the parents contribute,
Right.
versus looking at, like, in this situation, there's, a toxic environment affects the entire family.
Right.
And then see how that relates.
I think you explained it well in just now, where you described that paradox from the student's voice. So you're not casting a judgment on the parent, but this is how the student sees their parent. Both dynamics are coming from the parents, from the student's perspective.
You have more stuff?
I got plenty, but I don't wanna, do you wanna jump in there? All right, I got more. Could you scroll back to the figure with hope and academic achievement and social mind factors?
Sorry.
Yeah, this one. Your explanation of this just now made a lot more sense to me than in the writing. This is only one of the few parts. Overall, I thought your writing was solid. This was, the discussion of this, I think, is key because it lays out this intervening effect that you hypothesize hope to have. You explain it a lot better orally than in the paper. And the part that, what I saw in your oral presentation that I thought was lacking a little bit in the written was your focus on the left-hand side of this chart. And I realized when you were talking that this is really, for whatever reasons, when I was reading it, I was focused on the right-hand side. I'm thinking, a lot of your literature review reviews how hope is an antecedent to academic achievement, and your quantitative analysis confirmed that relationship. And so I was focused on the right-hand side, but when I hear you talking about it, you're focused on the left-hand side, and all you were doing in correlating hope and academic achievement is to show that there's a relationship, but you weren't. I think I realize now that you weren't trying to say that you're not trying to measure the. You're not trying to claim that hope is a determinant of the academic achievement. You're trying to say that there's an association.
That's correct.
And the social environmental factors affects that association. Emphasize that, because on the right-hand side, if there's problems, you have successfully showed the association between hope and academic achievement, but there is no causation. There's no temporal order. Right? You say it right out. Well, this is a snapshot. It's a cross-sectional study. There is no temporal dimension to that association, and that's why it's important on the right-hand side. I think you need to, just as you emphasize that circular relationship on the left-hand side, in your paper, make a note on the right-hand side, that double arrow. This is a recursive relationship. You acknowledge that hope can affect academic achievement, but also that academic achievement can affect hope. There's this two-way relationship, but that isn't the focus of your study. You just want to establish that there is that correlation. And what you focuses on is on this environment that affects that relationship. I didn't get that in the writing. I got it in the talk much more clearly, that your focus is on the left-hand side.
So I'm going to chime in there.
Yeah.
This was like your late add, right, to the thing.
Right.
And I think it's important, but it's underdeveloped.
Right.
And it's important because you need to find a way to visually represent what you can narrate in case study. Okay, so I think a heuristic like this is useful, but right now, like I didn't follow you very well at all in the way that you verbally explained it. And I think you're still trying to feel your way through how you understand this heuristic. So the first thing I would suggest is that you should enumerate it, right? So each arrow should have a number, and so that, because I don't understand, like, you know, why are some arrows gray, and why are some arrows fat, and why are some arrows,
Right.
you know, skinny, right?
Right.
So I think it needs to be, because what that indicates to me is that it's indicating something different, okay? That there's a different flow. For example, if I'm looking at your heuristic, based on the actual heuristic, there is a different flow between social environmental factors, bubble, and hope, and social environmental factors and academic achievement. And the reason I believe there's a different flow is because your heuristic uses a different arrow, right? So what does the different arrow mean, right? And how is the social environmental factors affecting academic achievement, and how is it affecting hope? Okay. Now, what all of the research that we have right now on hope in young people that's looking at the relationship between hope and academic achievement is that I have seen no studies, and I've read most of them, I haven't read all of them, but I haven't seen any that say that if you have low hope, you also have high academic achievement. Okay? So there is a really strong research evidence, and it's a fairly skinny body of research right now, because this is really new, groundbreaking stuff, that shows a direct correlation, a one-to-one correlation, and sees hope as a precursor to academic achievement. Okay? I haven't actually seen any evidence which suggests that academic achievement boosts hope. Okay? I've seen clear evidence that high academic achievement is the direct result of high hope levels. Okay? So I think you have to Sheldon's point, like, you got to figure out what is your claim. Okay? What your research seems to suggest pretty decisively is that there is a one-to-one correlation. Okay? That no one with low hope had high academic achievement. Okay? And there was a remarkably close one-to-one correlation between your hope level and how you were doing in school. That actually meshes with a much larger body of research looking specifically at hope and academic achievement. Where your contribution comes in is there's almost no studies that look at the relationship between those two things and students of color. Okay? All of Charles' work and sort of his folks who are following him, right, they're looking mostly at white kids. Right? But I think that that's why your work stands to make a major contribution, because yours is one of the first studies that's looking at this relationship for students of color, okay, and inserting that a broader societal analysis. Okay. So all that to say that I think that that's your money piece. Okay, the heuristic is very portable. It's an important conversation starter, and so so you need to be able to explain it in a way that makes sense to your grandma and to a superintendent. Okay, and it needs to be the same explanation. Okay, and I think when you got that down, then that heuristic can be really powerful in really explaining what it is that you found in your study.
I love diagrams. To me, this diagram does a lot, but I also think that this diagram is a deliverable. This is not a diagram of your findings. So what I would do is I would put this earlier on in the dissertation with the changes that Jeff is talking about in terms of the research, and then I would add the protective factors, the barriers, and have them kind of come in to make sense, you know, like, because that's your contribution. And I think that would really tighten up like what you're trying to say. So there's actually one person, and I've mentioned it before in other dissertation committees, Bertha Layton, who studied protective factors for Latino students. And she does this one, it's like a model that shows how protective factors affect these things. So I would look into it. She does not do hope, which, you know, like that's your major idea. But I think that it would be helpful for this diagram. I think then, because you have it like towards the end, in the summary part. Like, I think that you have one heuristic at the beginning that kind of goes, okay, this is what the literature says.
Right.
And then you go, here, look, this is
This is
what
how
I'm
transformed.
saying. Yes. Because of my research, it adds a whole other dimension. Yeah?
Yeah, I think that's really smart.
So,
This is fine, but this is before your study. We already knew all this. Right? So you front load that, and then you develop
look what I'm
heuristic part B, which includes the stuff that Allison's talking about to say, here's how I'm actually complexifying what we already know.
at. Right, the out of the mouths of babes one, right?
Right.
Because this is lit review.
Right.
And I think that that would be really awesome, because then you can, like you said, you can bring that in.
Yeah, that's nice.
You know, show up at a conference, this is what I'm showing, you know, this is your contribution. Again, I would agree. I'm confused about the little arrow and the big arrow, but that's just, because this
It takes
becomes-
more work. I think when we were creating it, it was less about what the arrows meant and more so about what the computer
Would let you do
yeah,
it?
yeah, would let me do. So, which is why the enumeration is important as well, right?
Right. Just know, though, that a visual is visual. Okay? So everything on your visual has to have meaning, right? That adds depth to what is otherwise just kind of a flat, right, visual. So, I mean, even the shapes you choose, there should be some logic behind it that contributes to the understanding. Right? So be artistic with it. Or something like that.
Yeah.
Or hire a graphic artist or
Right.
something.
Okay.
if you wanna come back to me, I can help you with it.
Yeah, I will definitely.
Okay.
do
You
that.
did this on Keynote or on PowerPoint? On Word?
On Word.
Okay, so we could use Word, or, you know, like, we can go and do it on, is this Keynote or PowerPoint?
This is PowerPoint.
Okay, yeah. Keynote might be helpful, and then we can do a JPEG PDF.
We'll make it work.
I can add a couple of things, I think.
Send it to Mac game up.
Because then you know, then you can use it. Oh, you know, any conference you just post it, you know? I have a couple questions I'm just gonna throw out there. Why middle school? You don't have to answer it right now. I think that comes up when I'm thinking about it, why choosing that, besides that you're working there, you know? Like, why middle school? What in particular is important in terms of middle school and hope? And, you know, like, what happened? You know, I know hope needs to start when you're in elementary, but when you get to a certain place in your life, you know, like middle school, what happens when you don't have it, right? I think that's important. So I'm gonna go through some things that, because I feel like the part that needs the most work is the recommendations. Even the changes, I still think it needs more. So when you define hope, like on page 2 of your PowerPoint, and you have this navigation of day-to-day lives, I think it's really important in your recommendations that it addresses how hope is defined. Because right now, when I look at the recommendations, I'm like, oh, okay, it's just a bunch of things to tell administrators, teachers, and school districts to do, but I don't know how that relates directly to hope, right? So things that need to show up in those recommendations are how you define hope and agency, right? In your research, you say that pathways drops, that there's no significance with regards to pathways. So when you actually change your heuristic, pathways need to look smaller. You know, like it goes, whoop, you know, like, and then agency goes, right? And then because when you do that, agency then becomes the things that you suggest to these people. Administrators, yeah. So that it's much clearer when you actually develop it out.
Can I piggyback on that?
Sure.
So, you described that finding, you know, how it's really agency that is affecting hope and pathways is insignificant. Right. But you don't really explain what's going on here. What do you think?
Well, what I think is this.
Surprising.
I think that oftentimes young people, you run into young people who feel a high sense of agency, meaning like, I know that I know that I can be successful. Like Gabriella said, like regardless, like I can do whatever I want to do, and they know that they'll find a way to do it. And for example, I know that a lot of times students who live in urban environments, right, socially toxic environments, they find a way to survive, and that doesn't. There's no particular pathway. It's not if you do this then that. They just survive. They do it. And so a lot of times I don't think that you have to necessarily know the pathway to get somewhere in order for you to actually get there. Because then, for example, if this guy right here says, well, I want to be a professional athlete and I'm willing to work hard. Well, he doesn't need to know that he needs to go to training camp and do this and do that, because then he can seek out people who can tell him that information and tell him the pathway that he needs to take. So I think that initially it's insignificant because it doesn't require you to know a pathway in order to feel the agency to want to do whatever you want to do.
That's a huge line.
That is.
Right.
And
Because it affects policy.
Mhm.
Like a lot of policy, so
That's right.
that's not clear yet. So in your recommendations, like you have to be clear that agency is this major factor in hope.
Yeah, and agency, and like Jeff was just alluding to, pathway is the easy thing, quite honestly, in terms of, showing students what A through G requirements are,
Right.
those kind of things are
Right.
mechanistic, but agency is where the human interaction contributes, to the hope. So, yeah, I would agree with what Alan was saying in his recommendation. It's really about the agency.
So just a dissertation that was done last year, Mark Bautista, was pedagogy of agency. And if you want a copy, I can just shoot it over to you. Because I think that will be helpful just to like really push the sort of specifics around agency. Because then when you recommend, you want to be like, yeah, this is what you're supposed to do.
Right. Okay.
So, I'm going to chime in there because this is slippery. Don't say that pathways don't matter. Don't say posting A through G doesn't matter. Don't say giving kids access to professionals, right, doesn't matter, because it does, right? But the ways in which schools have responded is they've sort of taken up this position that, oh, well, kids who live in this kind of neighborhood, right, don't see a doctor get up every day and walk out to their car, so they never dream that they can be a doctor. Well, we can fix that, because I know a doctor, and he can come in and he can talk to the kids. Right? So what has happened is that the ways in which schools have conceptualized pathways is they've oversimplified it, okay? And they haven't understood what you're illuminating, which is that pathways doesn't stand alone, that there's an interplay, right? There's a relationship between agency and pathways. And if you're not attentive to agency, okay, which is the action component, then pathways won't matter. You can stand doctors in front of kids all you want. They won't believe they can become doctors. Okay? And so what you're really contributing to the conversation is saying we do need pathways. Okay? We do need to expose young people to as many opportunities as possible. But that will not be sufficient. Okay? That we have to cultivate a sense of ownership and agency over their own lives such that they can pursue those pathways that we're putting in front of them. Okay? Because the truth of the matter is, if you go to wealthy communities, those kids see pathways all the time, right? Thousands of pathways for their lives. And that's part of what contributes to their high level of agency, right? That I don't just have 3 options in my life. Right? I've got thousands. And if you look at your high hope score, the one kid with a really high hope score, what did she say she believed about her life?
That she can do whatever she wanted to do regardless.
Okay.
First Latina president.
Right. That's the interplay. She doesn't just have agency. Okay? She also has a really strong sense of pathways. And so I want you to be really careful about how you articulate this, because people will run the other direction. Because they're looking for a quick fix. Right? And they'll abandon stuff that needs to be there. Okay, in order for this, and so I think the main point you want to continually make is there is a relationship between these two. And what your study is suggesting is that one without the other does not raise hope. one independently does not raise hope. You need an interchange of them. And what we're not doing very well right now is cultivating agency in young people. Because that's a hell of a lot harder to do. Because agency boils down to relationships. And those are a lot harder work than posting APG requirements.
I think pathways, there's a specific definition, right? I think access is another concept that might fit well. I don't know if you want to be thinking about that, but access allows more flexibility than just having pathways, because access can be different things, right? So that's just another tinkering with the ideas. Going back to the recommendations, I like what Jeff said, by the way. I think it's really important. You have to have both. But when I think of it, you need to have access and you need to have agency, right? Pathways is just, it doesn't quite.
I see what you're saying, because the agency, you can then, if you have the agency, then the access is available, then you can.
Right.
But then once you get the access, then they show you the pathway.
Exactly.
Right.
That pathway seems like this outcome piece.
Yeah. I think people have presumed a reverse relationship.
Yeah.
That if you give access, then agency will develop.
Exactly.
Okay? And that's ass backwards. Right?
Right.
And actually what we know is that if you have a high level of agency, you'll blaze a pathway, even if there isn't one. Right? You'll make access for yourself. Right? But I think we've thought about it in the other way, again, because agency is the hardest work. Right? And the truth of the matter is that a lot of the people that are trying to blaze these pathways and develop this access for kids don't know how to develop relationships with that group of kids.
That model looks different according to this conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a little bit of work, but I think it'll look really cool.
I'm gonna dream about it, and then it's
it'll
gonna come out when
manifest.
I'm in traffic.
And then you'll have
Exactly.
and then you'll use your agency.
Right.
Totally. There, that was your access to that pathway. So when you actually sit down to redraw, just narrate, and then draw as you're narrating, because then it'll probably just all come together.
What I would say, and I'm going to jump in here because this is a big gap between what I thought I was going to hear in the presentation, when I read your slides, when I read the paper, and then how you actually present it. To Sheldon's point, what makes your dissertation really compelling is the case studies. Right? These kids' narratives, right? It brings this to life. It illuminates these concepts that are otherwise abstractions. And I thought you were going to tell us these stories about these kids, because their names were up there and you had their voice up there, right? But their names and stories they felt a little disembodied to me, right? They just became data.
That's very important.
Right, and it was less compelling, right? I didn't feel like it was out of the mouths of babes. I thought it was out of the mouth of Damien. Right? And so I think you want to really think about that, and what makes the writing so strong. I think what will make the presentation much stronger is if you tell the case studies. Okay, he agrees fully. Okay, yeah, that's right. You gotta give it to him. I think what you could do, backing into Allison's point, okay, is that you could use the case studies to have multiple, heuristics. You remember that? Remember the stress slide that you seem to use? Okay, so give me 4 heuristics. Okay, here's what happens for a low hope kid. Okay. Social environmental factors are dominating, they're diminishing hope, they're diminishing academic achievement. Okay, here's what it looks like for low hope. Okay? Here's what it looks like for whatever you call it, middle hope.
Average hope.
Average hope. Okay? Here's what it looks like for high hope. Okay? And so you have these really compelling case studies right now. Okay? Give me a heuristic for that kid.
Got you.
Okay? So given this narrative, here's what starts to happen in this whole interchange and dynamic. Okay, these things start expanding, right? These threats start shrinking. Okay? And then I know, how it's actually manifesting okay? And you're driving the heuristic using real-life stories of kids that can bring it off the page, and we can really begin to understand what is otherwise somewhat of an abstraction.
So, you know that thing we talk about achievement gap all the time? I'll talk about it a lot, we talk about it a lot. And how you push this opportunity gap. I mean, you're with the school of thought,
Yes.
that there's an opportunity gap. I think you can add to that language by saying there's a hope gap. Okay, because I think that's different than opportunity gap. Opportunity gap really is about pathways and access. Now you are saying there's a hope gap, right? So that's your big contribution to that lineage.
Except, sorry, but you can speculate on that, but your sampling is of a relatively homogeneous socioeconomic group. And so you haven't measured a graph gap. You can hypothesize or draw on other literature.
And so essentially that would be done by just conducting a study with students who don't fall within
your sampling frame.
Sampling frame.
Yeah, I mean, one of my first questions early on that has been cleared up, and I didn't ask, but as I was reading, I was thinking, why didn't you observe non-black, non-Latino, or highly affluent students? I understand why now, because this is, you want to extrapolate to this group that has this historic experience with toxic environments. But you can't make that jump to saying that I've demonstrated the gap. You haven't seen that in your data, but you can draw on others.
Okay, so for the suggestion for the recommendations is for each of the groups of people. Did you work that out already with Jeff, that you're going to admin, teachers? Okay. So for each of those, because you can structure your recommendations however you want, and I think that it is helpful, you know, to have it the way you have here. But within each one, like administrators, I would think about how can administrators address barriers and how can they address protective factors according to your data. Because your data says this great stuff, and that's great stuff, right? How can administrators eliminate the barriers or address the barriers? And then how can administrators continue to develop the protective factors? And then teachers, same way. And then,
Okay.
does that make sense? Like, so that it's really clear that it's related to your research versus just a list of things that you think would be a good idea.
That really helps me.
Okay.
A lot.
That was the missing piece in the way we were talking about it,
Yeah. Thank you.
And I think then your models will reflect that. The models that you have, the heuristics that you'll have, will reflect those connections.
If your position is that those top two things, agency and pathway, that's what we need to really understand. Okay. This is how we're going to impact academic achievement. If we're more conversant in those things, we understand better how they play out in kids' lives. And if we understand how to elevate those levels, that's going to raise GPA. Okay? So just running an after-school tutoring program, or remediating kids, or having a longer school day, or changing from, you know, first, second, third period block scheduling, none of that is going to matter, okay, if it's not directly connected to these things. That's our starting point. Okay? So that seems to be your whole position. Okay? So when you think about your recommendations, the fact that agency and pathways is never mentioned, not once, okay, suggests that that isn't really your findings. Okay, so I think her point about connecting it back to your data is really important. But equally important for me, the part that she kind of unlocked for me when we were talking out there was how important it is that there's a common lexicon that you are using to drive the conversation about your research. And what you want people conversant in is not, it is hope, okay? But what you actually want them conversant in is the language of how you elevate hope levels. And everything that you're saying in your analysis is about agency and pathways. So that should drive the conversation. How do administrators raise agency and pathways? How do teachers raise agency and pathways? It's implicit in your list of things. It needs to be explicit.
Just for kicks, if you want to call it that. This was Jackie's school, right?
Yes.
So imagine she's still at that school. What do you tell her based on your study?
Well, one, I tell her based on my study, because I know the schools, one, we have to completely change the way that our educators, the teachers at the school, are even addressing the young people in the classroom. It has to start there, at least in my opinion, because before we can even get to changing, increasing agency and pathways, we have to change the way that our teachers look at these young people, the way they see it. And I think that comes with building these relationships. And so how I would tell Jackie, I said, well, what is the school doing in the community? You know, how do we interact with the parents in our communities? What are their interactions with us? Like, how do we see our students? What are the teachers' relationships with their students? So I would start there and ask her to start investigating those relationships between teachers and students, teachers and communities. And then we can move towards moving the agency. But I believe that it has to start there. It has to start there because we can do all of this training we can do all this training and work in these great workshops, but at the end of the day, if we don't have the relationships with these students and their families, then we just have a bunch of information stored in our heads. And as Dr. Andrade said, that's the hard part, because that's the work that's going to take you stepping outside of your curriculum time or your free period to plan. This is going to take your personal time and a devotion to the people. And I think that if I would tell Jackie, what can you do as a district to support teachers in that so that they don't feel overwhelmed as if they're doing something that's extremely extra to their job.
Okay, that whole framework has to change. The way you talk about it has to change. Okay, if you're DR, okay, you don't ask her. Okay, she doesn't call you in, right? So you can ask her a bunch of questions. She's calling you in because you are a national expert, okay, and you need to start positioning things that come out of your mouth like a researcher that is a national expert that has studied these things, okay? And that means, right, if you're asking a question, it's purely rhetorical. Right? You're not actually asking her, right? Yeah, because you already know that her school doesn't have a strong relationship with the community, because if it did, all the research bears out that those kids would be doing a lot better. Okay? So what's really important, this is where I was on your head, right? These vagaries need to stop, okay? And you need to understand that people are going to call you in and they're going to say, Damien, tell us what to do. We wouldn't be calling you if we knew what to do. Tell us what to do. And you need to really be able to say, this is what administrators need to do, okay? So you're saying they need to create an environment where teachers have a better relationship with the community, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So is that a common sense statement, or is that a statement from an expert?
That's a common sense statement.
Okay, so the expert adds what to that statement?
The how.
Right. Okay, and that's what has to be in the implications. They need to do this, okay, and this is how you're going to do it. Okay. Here's a set of ways, and this is what I'm saying, this is where you could pull from the literature. Okay. You know, Lisa Delpit suggests you do this, right? Jen suggests you do this. Tintiago Cabales suggests you do this. And that's where you really begin to give her some really useful stuff that is, here's what you need to do, and here's how you can do it. Okay? And then the next question for you will be, how can you support us with that? Okay? And that's where you pay your bills.
It takes a little little analysis, I think, to say, school districts, you have this power. With this power, this is how you should address, these barriers, and this is how you should create these protective factors. It's that same for teachers. Look, and you have a classroom. You have the power to do what, right? You have the power to address barriers this way. Same thing. Like, start with what they have, what kind of power they actually have.
And the crazy thing is when me and you talk like that. You'll be like, hey, the school needs to do this, and they need to do that. And then suddenly, right, you get into like, you know, doctoral student, and you start being Damien, okay? And you got to really begin to merge those personalities because you have a lot of very instructive stuff that is both situated in your own worldview and experience as a black man, right? But also is now supported by years of research training and professional training. And that's a really powerful combination when you can walk in the room and hold yourself in that way. Okay? And I think the more you learn how to write like that, with that kind of authoritative position, I think the more you'll be able to influence what actually happens on the ground in schools with principals, superintendents, and so forth. And it, you know, it takes practice. Humility is good, bro. It is good to be humble, but time for that is past. Let them know what they need to do.
It's good to be humble at home.
Right, yeah.
I'm just saying, you know, and then when you're in a meeting, I know best, because I'm like, I always have to like speak very differently than I'm speaking to you. Because I'm like, I have to be this much taller, you know, and not look like this. I have to be very, very forward about what I'm thinking. And you have it in you.
Let's build on this for a moment, Damien. Where are you going to be in 10, 20 years, and where does this study fit in that? How does this position you and where you're going after this, if you're staying with us?
Ideally, in 10, 20 years from now, I would like to be organizing, no, take that back. In 10, 20 years from now, my wife and I will have created a school where the focus is on social justice and building agency and community, not only just for the students who attend our schools, but there will be a focus on families, because as I had said earlier, that when this student walks into my classroom or walks into the teacher's classroom, so does his auntie, so does his uncle, so does everyone else. And if I know that the social and environmental factors in their environment are impacting them, then we need to address all of those things. And so my hope is that my goal is to be able to take this research and focus it in terms of the mission of our school and how we actually educate young people and the community. So that's where I see myself in 20 years from now. 15. After
That's a great goal. Hopefully we can help you with that.
oh yeah, y'all not done with me.
So if the committee doesn't have any more pressing stuff that they want to put out there, I'm going to open it up to the broader community. Okay, first of all, thank you, because it's great. This can be really lonely work, especially when you're presenting to 3 committee members who you've had classes with. So it's great to see y'all here. Thank you for coming. And feel free to press him in any way about the work that you saw. We'll save the congratulations for a little bit later. Right now, we'll try and keep it harsh, critical, and insightful.
In the diagram on one of the barriers to hope you discussed, students are not engaged because they don't see themselves in the text, or that it doesn't relate to their everyday life. Did the students mention anything about the demographics of their teachers? Because we know it's important if the student's able to connect to their teachers based on gender, race, ethnicity, religion. That would be interesting to see.
So I know in the students that I interviewed, they didn't. In fact, some of them when the student did talk about their teacher, they talked about the relationship between the teacher in terms of how that teacher talked to them, but not necessarily if it made a difference whether they were male or female or black or
Because
what.
they were saying that they didn't, I hate the teacher. I always get in trouble from not listening to the teacher, but I hate the teachers here.
Right.
What do the teachers look like?
Well, in this particular institution, the teachers are either white or Asian.
In your population, African American.
Latino.
So connection based on race, looks like there wasn't one.
Right.
It's a good finding too. But it doesn't, it's not, it's more like a setup.
Mhm.
Like when you write who's teaching there at the school, you should just describe who's teaching.
Right.
So that when you read the data,
You know.
And you can't make any, like Sheldon was saying, like you can't make any claims off of it because you didn't dive into that, right?
Right.
You didn't, but, okay, it is a data point nonetheless
Right.
that is worth lifting up. That you don't know if there's a correlation there, but it's pretty interesting
Right.
that this teacher group is overwhelmingly
Mhm.
not the same racial group as the kids that you studied, and not a single kid mentioned, even the High Hope kid, mentioned having a really strong relationship with teachers.
Mhm.
Okay? That may mean nothing. Right? They may have a really strong relationship with teachers, but isn't that really interesting?
Right.
Right? That, and it warrants further study.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's already research out there that,
Oh, there is definitely.
yeah.
There is definitely. Right, but he won't be able to make that claim about his study. because he didn't-
That was an afterthought.
But for sure, there's clear research that those things matter.
And even academic achievement, right now California, actually most of the country is going through a change with the Common Core standards and what we consider to be academic achievement, and that's gonna change and, down the line, that would be something interesting to see as well, what constitutes achievement. So, and one more, question that I actually had is, was there one particular student that you were able to identify with,
Yeah.
that you maybe saw yourself in?
Yeah, it was. And there had to be, this is where there was a delicate balance between me as Damien and then me as, candidate for doctoral degree. Because I received the green light from the Institutional Review Board to actually use prior known information of these students, which is one of the ways I was able to create their profiles. And also, I'm the counselor at the school, and I'm one of 4 African-American people at the school and the only African-American administrator. So all those variables in place, there were relationships that I've had with not only these students, but most of the students, especially those of color. So, yeah, I did.
But that's also why it's so important that folks of color do this research, and because it changes the lens through which all the data is analyzed. Right? And it's also why it's important that practitioners do the research. Had you been an outsider, you wouldn't have these kind of case studies, right? Because you wouldn't have that depth of knowledge about them as young people. And so I think it's important to lift that up as well, that it is important that we have more researchers of color. It is important that we have more practitioners doing research, because it changes what we can learn from the research.
This is food for thought. I think this is the biggest thing that kind of stood out to me, and you talked about student empowerment, and, I think you said something about a committee or putting them in a forum to where they're able to hold each other accountable or kind of chime in on a specific issue. And I think a common denominator with that empowerment and everything that's happening today, from your writing to your family being here, to your wife being here, to your board, your committee, your chair, is a team. And I think whether it's in your writing or in your presentation is showing that it's something that